us all together. Lord, we gather in your name as children of a sovereign God. Forever we proclaim, to God be all glory.
Well, good morning. How you doing? It is Monday, October the 20th, 2025. Welcome to episode 478 of The Thinking Theologian as we continue our journey through the scriptures. So today we read Mark chapter 14. The title of today is The Religious Leaders' Hearts Exposed. The focal scriptures in Mark chapter 14, verse 56. And this is what it says. For many were giving false testimony against him, and the testimonies did not agree. So how we treat others and what we say and do reveals the character of a person. If a person is not honest or insists that lies be told about another person, it reveals evil and brokenness in their heart. And so we need to be very aware of that. So you think it might not happen, but it happens more often than you would believe. And so, for instance, this is how most rumors get started about others. A person either gets jealous or decides to ruin someone's reputation to make themselves look better. This can happen by what they say and even how they convince other people to believe a lie that they concocted. So they're trying to create a narrative here and try to get things going, but their whole purpose of it is to start something that is not true, to create a narrative that they want created. And so in today's reading, this is done by the religious leaders. They are accusing Jesus and having witnesses give false testimony about what Jesus did and was teaching. So these leaders were so determined to get rid of Jesus that they would break the very law they said was important to them. However, Jesus didn't call them out because of their sin. He allowed them to continue in it and expose the wickedness of their hearts. And this is something we're going to see even tomorrow as we go over this, when Jesus stays silent. Jesus is doing something that's really phenomenal here, and something that we need to look at of how he approached people who did wrong things like this. So you might be thinking that this topic is heavy and doesn't need to be addressed in a daily devotional. However, I will argue that this is the right place to have this important conversation. Religious leaders sin, and religious leaders will protect their institutions at all costs if they are not submitted to the Lord. And so what I'm saying here is that they'll do anything to protect themselves and protect the institution instead of protecting the truth. And so, after all, this is what was happening with Jesus. This is what they were doing with him. They were protecting their religion and not protecting the truth of what they've seen and what they heard and what they witnessed. He has exposed their hypocrisy and their love of the law over God. And so this is really important for us to get at the heart of what Jesus is doing. He's exposing what they're doing by the way they're acting and by him handling the way he was. So this truth must not be forgotten in our current context. Many religious leaders today will hide and demonize others to cover their own sin. They will promote false narratives and even have witnesses that tell the story they want told. These men will be judged and they will have to give an account for all their actions. And so these religious leaders in Jesus' day will have to give an account for their lies and having people give false testimony over who Christ is and what he's done. So the application for you today is very straightforward. Pray for those who lead you and pastor your congregations. Pray that they meet the biblical qualifications. Pray that they be lifted up so ministry and position doesn't become more important than their personal walk with the Lord. Because if they are putting the institution and what they're doing and their job over the true intimate relationship with the Lord, they miss the point of everything. This is what these religious leaders do and what many religious leaders do currently. And I'm not trying to say that every church is like this, every person is like this, but it happens a lot more often than you realize. So nothing reveals a religious leader's heart more than when things don't go their way or as planned. If they become angry, combative, a gossip, and cruel, they have much sin in their life and need to step away. In many cases, they need to examine if they really have been changed by the gospel. There are some basic fundamental things that shows what a believer is. And if religious leaders aren't doing that, one, are they should not only be in a religious leadership position, they need to see if they're really saved by the power of the gospel. So I know the topic is heavy. I've said that. And I know it's not fun to discuss, but churches must do a better job of dealing with bad leaders and reminding them and removing them from ministry. And so too often we allow bad people and people who have no business being in ministry to be in positions of influence, because it's easier to have a person there than to do the right thing. And I have personally witnessed this and seen this. And it is heartbreaking to see when people believe the lie instead of the truth. And so, so when they show you who they really are, when problems arise, take them at their word and their actions. So our churches deserve better, and the Bible demands a certain standard. And so what I want everyone to see and get from today is that there's a biblical standard to be a religious leader. Here, the religious leaders condemned Jesus falsely and did things in a way that was not correct. And they were enticing with false testimony to get their way. And they created a narrative because they didn't want Jesus to be around. And in churches today, when people are exposed, when bad leaders are exposed, religious leaders and even other people will rally around to make sure the truth is not revealed, because it's easier to tell a lie than to deal with the problems and the truth that are exposed by people who are doing. And again, what Jesus was exposing was the hypocrisy and the lie of the religious leaders, of the Jewish religious leaders, because they knew everything. They did everything. They looked clean. As Jesus said, you look like whitewashed tombs inside are full of dead men's bones. He's like, I'm exposing you for who you are because you're not truly in love with the Lord. And it's evident by how you act and what you do. And now even your actions towards me reveal this. And so if you're at a church where this is either has happened or is allowed to happen, it needs to be dealt with. But unfortunately, many people will push it under the rug and not deal with it because it's hard to deal with this, because you will become the villain. People will not like you for it, and they'll try to say why you're meddling. People rather deal with gossip and lies and deceit instead of dealing with what is true. So we need to have a high standard for people who are in ministry positions and people who hold those people to ministry positions. And I bring this up again so often because it happens way more than you realize. I've had conversations with over a dozen people over the past 2 years who have experienced something like this in ways that are just brutal by how things were handled and things were done. And in every instance, every single instance, the truth was covered up and a lie was propagated to cover up what was really happening, because they would rather things be done that way. So we need to have a higher standard for ourselves, for people we are ministering with, and our churches need to have a higher standard, not perfection, because none of us can reach that, but a biblical qualification and standard. Because a person who is a liar, who is a gossip, who demeans other people, who's not gentle, they are disqualified from ministry. But people don't like having these difficult conversations because it brings up difficult things. And it may mean that some people who are in ministry should not be in ministry. And that is a very difficult conversation to have, but one I think we need to start having more of. Are you truly called, and do you have the biblical qualifications? Being a good speaker is one. It is not all. There are many other things that require for a person to be a pastor and be a leader. And this, being a good talker is on the low end of what's going on. And there's so many other things that are more important. So tomorrow we'll be in Mark chapter 15 and 16. We'll finish the book of Mark.